Welcome, Saints. I am Miguelina Howell, Dean of Christ Church Cathedral. Welcome to another rendition of Faith and the City, a series of conversations exploring faith in the public square. Christ Church Cathedral is located at the heart of the city of Hartford in Connecticut, with a mandate to be a catalyst and a connector in God's mission. It is in the context of that call that we engage with various organizations and initiatives that further the welfare of our beloved city and affirm our commitment to follow Jesus, traveling lightly into our neighborhoods. I am delighted to introduce you to today's guest. She's the artistic director of Hartford Stage, Melia Benhussen. Melia for us at the cathedral, since we pronounce her name in Spanish. Our cathedral has a life-giving partnership with our neighbors across the street. Partnership that has strengthened thanks to Melia's leadership and vision for the stage and her understanding of the importance of community in the work that we all do. Welcome, Melia.
Muchas gracias. Thank you so much.
So delighted that you're here with us today. I would like to share about you a little bit before we start our conversation. So Melia Benhussen is an award-winning director and artistic leader who has directed extensively at leading theaters throughout the country since 1984. She was raised in Mexico City and is fluent in Spanish and has translated and adapted a variety of texts, including her edition of the Langston Hughes translation of Federico Garcia Lorca's Blood Wedding, one of my favorites, by the way. She's currently working on an adaptation of Tony Lucas' Common Ground to premiere at the Huntington Theater in Boston next year. Her acclaimed work with new plays has taken her to the Eugene O'Neill Theater Center New York Stage, and FUM, Playpen, the Playwright Center Sundance, and other new play programs across the United States. Melia has ongoing playwrights collaboration with distinguished writers. Melia, we are so thankful that you accepted the call to come to Hartford. So share with our audience what led you to accept Hartford Stage invitation to lead them into a new era.
And first of all, thank you, Lena. I love being your neighbor. I love being part of the public square that we are building in Hartford. So just want to say how honored I am to be your guest. When I first received the call, or rather the email asking me if I was interested in Hartford Stage, I had this immediate sense of a calling, right? Of the privilege and honor of an opportunity to lead a civic organization in a city that's in transition, that is in need, right? We know that downtown Hartford and that our Hartford region has so much wealth of culture and people and spirit, and yet has socioeconomic challenges and contemporary urban challenges of all the inequities that exist in our country. And that a theater could be at the center of a healing of that. That's exciting, right? To have the opportunity to build something larger than oneself. I've been a freelance theater director and a professor for many years, many years. But I have not had the opportunity, as I have now, to really engage civically and create work while creating the audience for the work, and the synchronicity of building that communication. I mean, it's just a tremendous opportunity.
It's beautiful. So one of our many vocations as a cathedral is to engage with the arts. And we particularly focus on nurturing what I call the sweet spot. It's that intersection where spirituality and the arts takes form. Tell us, Melia, how do you experience that intersection of spirituality and the arts in your work?
I love the question, and just have to say I love how your philosophy and Christ Church Cathedral's philosophy embraces this. I grew up in a very traditional Jewish upbringing. And so for me, the spirituality of theater and the spirituality of Judaic practice have always gone hand in glove. So I used to joke, and I hope this isn't too irreverent, but that I practice two religions, because I do really truly believe in the opportunity that the art, that great theater gives us to connect with our best selves, our deepest selves, our secret selves, the silent voices within that don't always have room to be expressed, right? We go to the theater and we can see the great moments of our lives played out for us, and we learn from them. We learn about ourselves and each other, right? A very smart playwright I heard once say that theater was the gym for the muscles of empathy. And so that, right, and so that we go to sort of test ourselves, to push our boundaries, and to experience what it means to truly, I think, be present, right? And that is something that religion, all religions, and arts have in common, is how do we pay attention? How do we be present to the still small voice within, and to our and to those sitting with us as we experience either the divine or the artistic presence within us.
That's powerful. That's beautiful. And as you say that, I keep envisioning our future together, where Hartford Stage will be using our cathedral renovated space to precisely do that. Bring
I,
that muscle to work, to exercise
I,
in a place that is set aside for sacred work.
I'm so excited by the vision of people crossing our street from one organization to another if they come to you for religious practice, say, on a Sunday morning, and then cross the street for a show that Sunday afternoon, and we feed them lunch in between. You and I share wanting to feed people all the time.
Absolutely.
Um, but that sense, and yes, you're absolutely right that we can be in your very sacred space reading a playwright's new work and feeling how much that playwright is reaching for something larger than his or herself in the work and wanting to reach the community. No, it's I, I'm gonna get all verklempt. I'm gonna get all weepy at the possibilities that we share, and that being neighbors. I will say, coming to Hartford, you were one of the first people to welcome me to Hartford. I want all of you listening to know what an extraordinary woman the Reverend Howell is. But my first day in the office, there was a bouquet of flowers from Reverend Howell welcoming me to Hartford. So your friendship and collaboration and the possibilities of really awakening both our communities and merging our communities and creating this public square where the spiritual, the artistic, and the civic are interlaced really makes this work feel all the more important.
And it's so good to have you as a partner in this work. I'm looking forward to the breakfast that we are hosting, Hartford Stage and Christchurch Cathedral on October 28th, for a select group of civic, religious, and artistic leaders, so that we can have conversations about that common ground and how we together engage with the public square for the welfare of our city and our
That's right.
state. So it's exciting. We have lots of opportunities ahead of us, and yet we are in this time of pandemic. And that is a good segue to my
Okay.
next question. So you and managing director, Cynthia Ryder, arrived to Hartford Stage in a time where it was a couple of
Just
months
in
before,
time for a pandemic.
just in time, couple of months before the shutdown, when you were starting to get to know your staff, when you were starting to plan for the future. And as a board member of Hartford Stage, as a
Thank
proud
you.
board member, I can attest that Hartford Stage has transformed the challenges into opportunities during this time of pandemic. From presenting virtual offerings to a significant capital campaign, Raise the Curtain. What have been the highlights for you in this process during this time of pandemic that has, I believe, given Hartford Stage an opportunity to reimagine itself, even in the midst of the crisis? So would you like to share more about those highlights?
It's a wonderful question. I mean, the when we shut down the theater, we had to lay off a huge percentage of our staff, around 70% of the staff was laid off. That was incredibly painful, and I still, all of us who have remained at the organization and those who've now returned, will always feel that tear in the culture, right? Of people who gave so much to our theater, who made Hartford Stage what it is. At the same time, we joked, those of us who have sort of ridden these waves together, how much we were on a lifeboat. And the 16, give or take, core members who stayed dedicated to Hartford Stage through this period really did, we really did look at how to transform institutionally, given the twin pandemics of COVID and racial injustice in this country. We are grateful for a national movement around theater and arts organizations towards a reckoning with the history of racial injustice in this country. But so we had many tools that emerged from the pandemic, ironically, because people weren't making plays, they were finding ways to increase communication. So I think as much as, and you've heard me rant against Zoom is challenging, but this is the gift of Zoom. The gift of Zoom has been more conversations. And I think institutionally, what Zoom gave us, even though we were all, in our own homes being safe and following all the protocols, it gave us an opportunity to do readings, share conversations, and talk about the future of the stage. Talk about what is really a minimum wage, right? Theater, like so many industries, has relied on dedicated people who were willing to work for far less than what a living wage would be because they love the craft. So how do we increase that enthusiasm, maintain it, and say, yes, we're grateful that you love doing this work, but everyone needs a living wage? How do we make sure that that's one of our tenets institutionally? Right? How do we make sure that we all learn to listen to each other better? And what is it? It's not that there is an administrative hierarchy institutionally. I believe there has to be. That's part of how this system works. But the porousness between mentor and mentee, the ability to hold really parallel conversations, one of which might be hierarchical, but the other which is not, or that reverses hierarchy. I think these ideas, because we weren't in production, we're able to really take root organizationally. We've changed our hiring practices. We've put an EDI lens on all our hiring. We've added trainings for our staff. And so that's maybe a little bit too much of just a list of bullet points, but when you ask me what it's meant to me, just personally, I feel like we're truly listening to each other as people now and understanding the complexity of each individual's background and point of view in a way that I think we didn't before the pandemic.
And I think that has a lot to do with your leadership and your vision, because in that process, that is happening a change of culture in the stage where you arrive saying, we need to be more inclusive. We would like to see different faces in the stage, which is right in your background, a beautiful setting.
Yes, this is come, and all of you listening, if you haven't been here, come, and there should be nothing stopping you. You write me if you need a ticket. We start producing soon, but yes, this theater needs to reflect the city it's in, and the future of any organization civically is to truly reflect the makeup of its region. This theater needs to serve you, its community, and not the other way around.
And I know you have a committee of the board that is on Latinx, Hispanic culture, advocacy. Would you like to say more about what are your hopes for that committee and the work that is ahead of us in the city to be more inclusive?
I mean, one of the things that excited me about Hartford was its large percentage of Latino, Latinx, Hispanic Spanish speakers in this region. As you know, I grew up in Mexico City. My adopted father is Mexican. And so I really have always felt that the world had more than one language and that my day to day life had more than one language and one culture. And I think there is so much opportunity with Latino culture, Latinx culture in our country that we have not taken advantage of historically, artistically. So that it is both what I hope this committee of the board, I mean, I'm so grateful, including new board members like you, to increase our bilingual outreach, which is not to say that we're assuming we can serve non-English speakers, but rather that we are reaching to a more bilingual worldview. Does that make sense? I mean,
Absolutely
that's,
does.
do you know, and a bicultural worldview. And how much Latino culture, right? The first Latinx playwright to win the Tony for Best Play was just this past weekend for a play commissioned by Hartford Stage called The Inheritance. So I do think there's an invisibility a little bit of Latinidad in the arts and perhaps in society, and there's just it's such an extraordinary resource, both the people and the culture. That yes, I'm
And
hoping this committee will really help us manifest that on stage and in the theater building itself.
And I recall one of your first initiatives was in 2019 in December to have a reading in Spanish of Christmas carols, which brought a significant number of people to the stage to have that reading. And it's
My
part of encouraging and motivating minorities and other communities of color to also be connected with the arts in a way that makes sense to us, to them.
It's so
So,
wonderful, right? I mean, A Christmas Carol, I mean, Navidad en México es lo más bello del mundo, ¿no?
sí.
I'm sure in the DR it is as well, so I don't mean to be biased, but pero
Although you
Mex
are, you and Jorge are.
Jorge and
We
I are
did
totally biased.
for
Mexico
our
City,
audience, we did posadas too.
me encantan las posadas. So yeah, to read A Christmas Carol in Spanish and to I hope we'll continue doing this is that we didn't read it, we had the audience read it, right? So everyone who wanted to read came up and read different scenes, and parents and children both read in Spanish, and neighbors, and we had churros porque hay que tener
Yes.
churros y chocolate caliente. But to say this building is your building and that there are ways of accessing the work that aren't as passive as simply sitting and watching a play that on some level you feel is not yours, right? It's part of the
Exactly.
challenge of art, and I think, right, of religion as well, as you've talked about it. In your transformation of your space, it's how do we lose what in the theater I would call the proscenium arch? How do we lose that feeling that what's happening there is separate from you? It's like it's not watching a movie. It's breathing with people in space. And that's different than other media. Theater and religion are demanding a breathing together.
And it's what our presiding bishop called a couple of weeks ago, from our perspective, leading from the narthex. And the narthex is that place, that little vestibule between the street and the church. And it's
I
such a great
love that.
image. It's a beautiful image because it reminds us to be connected to what we believe is the sacredness of our spaces, but also to be connected to the community that is outside our spaces. And leading from the narthex is precisely what I believe you were doing when we did the posadas at Hartford Stage and brought our street choir, the choir Music Moves Hartford, a choir that is whose members are housing insecure and food insecure. And it's a program with Cuatro Puntos and Christchurch Cathedral. And they were singing, feeling proud. And your patrons were experiencing the diversity that the Posada brought, not only from a language perspective, but also socioeconomically.
It was
So it was just
fascinating.
powerful.
It was very powerful to be in the lobby that night, right? Because there's that first response of from both sides of who are you, and then the music begins, and they're just with us. I hope the pandemic abates enough that we are able to do all these things
The future,
this Christmas.
definitely. We hope so. We remain safe. So tell me about, now that we're speaking about culture, how your upbringing in Mexico informs your work and the way you relate to the people you encounter in your life and your profession as a theater director. And you share some of that
Yeah,
earlier.
it's so interesting. I think there's I guess two themes that jump out, and I'm sure you know how I go on tangents, so forgive me if I don't actually
I'll
answer.
bring you back.
Gracias. I think I always grew up with a sense of translation, and how you had to get the literal translation doesn't work, that it's about the essence of communication for people, right? My growing up in a bilingual household, or really trilingual, because I was studying at a yeshiva, right, a Jewish school, so I was learning Hebrew too, which I wish I still spoke, but that sense of what words mean in different languages, and how when you translate one word from one language to another, you're not actually communicating. You think you're communicating. But the way to truly communicate is to go to the essence of ideas, not just the language of ideas. So I think that has really informed, for me, directing is translation. How do you go from a text to a representation of that text on stage? Right now, I'm working on a Eugene O'Neill play called Our Wilderness is Only Comedy, and we're using an incredibly diverse, brilliant cast of American actors that range in color and backgrounds and ethnicities. And the stage directions of O'Neill are utterly literal. Red hair, brown eyes. It's an Irish American worldview. That doesn't mean that that's who this family is. So you have to get to the essence of what he's really describing as family, and then communicate that essence to an audience. So I think that's one way, this notion of translation and essence. I also think growing up in Mexico, both with my coloring and with a Jewish background in a city that had its tensions around anti-Semitism, um, I think has made me very aware of what it means to be a soloist, to be made other. I spent a year working in Asia, in Japan and in China, and in the 80s. But
Mhm.
that sense, I really, and then my childhood, it's just a sense of how challenging it can be to make community that isn't exclusive, right? Because part of what we love about community, all of us just naturally, is familiarity. And so I think I've moved in enough different communities to both have felt the comfort of the familiar of a Mexican Jewish upbringing, or an American Mexican upbringing, or do you know, and to know how easy it is to exclude as part of that warmth, right?
And absolutely. And those experiences have equipped you to be culturally competent, which has informed in your work, which leads me to my next question. Tell us more about the play that you're working on that will be premiered in Boston. Um,
So this is a fascinating piece, and I have been working on it for almost a decade. Tony Lucas, a brilliant writer, may rest in peace, won a Pulitzer for a book called Common Ground, which is a history of busing in Boston, of really the busing crisis, not the all of, although Tony's book really does cover enormous amounts of history. But the book has become, in the years since it was published in 1986, a kind of Rosetta Stone to explain busing in Boston. And it's viewed as history as opposed to as a subjective document. So, brilliant playwright
because of the
Christian.
way it reflects on segregation, or
Yes, and the way it's sort of, because the narrative feels so comprehensive, it feels like he's telling you everything you need to know about busing and the crisis in Boston. The biases of the narration in the book, or even just the focus on whose story is being told in the book, has left some gaps and has left a sort of bias within the narrative of the history of the busing crisis. So Kirsten Greenwich and I have co-conceived. She's the playwright, I'm the director, but we've been working very closely for many years on how to reflect on this narrative of busing and maybe add to the story, elaborate on the story of what happened in the busing crisis in Boston in the late 70s, right? Boston was very late to school integration
Yes.
and has a history of being a very racist city. And there's a lot of pain in BIPOC communities in Boston still around what happened around busing. And, you know, right now the schools in Boston are more segregated than they were before busing. So and we're not attempting to heal, we're not attempting to provide all the answers, but we are hoping through this production to bring up the questions again of how to look at history, how to write our stories, because we really can't move forward, and this would be the great belief in the storytelling that is theater, that you really can't move forward without understanding your past history, and that's narrative, and that can be either fiction or fact, and I would argue that even fact is often fiction, and fiction is sometimes truer fact, right? So this piece is really, and we're working with a company of Boston-based actors. So it's a project that I started many years before coming to Hartford, and but it really speaks to how to work with a city, how a theater can be part of a regional conversation that needs to happen, and I hope we are able at Hartford to do that kind of work as well.
I'm looking forward to that, our collaboration in bringing that storytelling to the public square, into creating those relationships that would enable us to then move forward in advancing the welfare of our city. It's exciting, and
Yeah,
praying that the pandemic is soon behind us so that we can do this more fully.
I
Well, thank
agree.
you, Melia. Thank you so much. Is there
Gracias a ti.
algo más que quieras decirle a nuestra audiencia?
Nada más, mil gracias por ser mi amiga, mi compañera en este trabajo, and an invitation to all of you at Christchurch Cathedral and in this extraordinary community to join us at Hartford Stage at any time. We really, it's a big part of the joy of this job is having this collaboration and this partnership civically.
Excellent. And every day I come to the office and I see your marquee with pictures when it shows community and education and arts, and I see picture of our cathedral community there. It's
You're
really makes
very
brings a
precious.
smile. It brings a smile. It brings
It's
a smile
good.
to my
You
heart.
matter so much to us, and I'm so honored to be your guest today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Um, Saints, we will see you next month in our next rendition of Faith in the City. And thank you, Melia, once again for your time.
Thank you.